support of the Kurdish leaders, municipality of Dikranagerd, of Diyarbakir, and the support of the Armenians in Istanbul and all over the place. So it was a very unusual and wonderful revival of this huge Armenian church with 7 altars, the biggest Armenian church in the Middle East. And that was a safe haven for these Armenians to come out of hiding and to look for and find each other and to find their identity. And shortly thereafter, that church was seized by the Turkish government. It was shut down, and the Sırp Giragos Foundation went to court to try to get it back. It was just recently said, okay, you can have it back, but that church is shut down. The area is off limits. It has been damaged in the ongoing Turkish-Kurdish conflict. The Turkish military have really done a number on the people there, on the buildings there. And I just spoke with one of the girls via email, one of them you saw in the film, 2 days ago, who is devastated, saying, I have nowhere to pray, I have nowhere to go. For 5 years it has been shut down, and the Armenian community is kind of receding back into their holes, into their shells. But these are the people that we really need to keep connected to us, to nurture them, to cultivate them, to make them know that they matter, because they're the ones who will protect our Sırp Giragos. They will protect our heritage. They will protect each other and make sure that we stay alive and they stay alive on those lands. Arakelyan.
Hi, Paulus, good morning. Thank you so much, Ani, for that really powerful presentation. So Ani talked to us about the architecture and the spaces and the cities where Armenian culture and Armenian lives unfolded for centuries in Western Armenia, what is today Eastern Turkey. What I will talk to you about is what happened to the objects, furnishings, works of art, religious and liturgical objects that were located inside these spaces and that were displaced, looted, trafficked during the Armenian genocide and its aftermath. Okay, so this is an Assyrian manuscript that is located today in the Houghton Library at Harvard. And you see that it has a crater, and that was caused by a bullet that had been fired directly into the manuscript. And we know a little bit about this manuscript. The violence that was enacted on this manuscript took place around 1895 during the massacres then. So this is an example of the power that religious manuscripts exerted in the old Armenian communities of the Ottoman Empire. These religious manuscripts were considered not only books, but sacred objects that had a lot of power. They had the power to accomplish miracles. And if you were an enemy of Armenian culture or you had determined to target Armenian society for extermination, then targeting their culture and their art, especially religious culture, was one means to enact this kind of violence. I became very interested in one work of art that is a survivor of all of the almost complete devastation of Armenian cultural heritage in the old Ottoman Empire. 8 pages from a famous Gospels manuscript, the Zeytun Gospels, that had been illuminated by the greatest Armenian medieval illuminator, Toros Roslin. These 8 pages are located today in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, right here. These pages are our neighbors. I became aware of them in 2010 when the Western Prelacy of the Armenian Church in America sued the Getty Museum, challenging the Getty's possession of these objects. And the church argued that these 8 pages had been removed from the Gospels as a result of the Armenian genocide, and therefore they had been stolen, and so demanded their return. And this, as the case made its way in the courts, I became very interested in the history of this object because unlike so much of Armenian cultural heritage and religious heritage that has been completely destroyed during the genocide and its aftermath, this was an object that had survived. And I wanted to know how it had survived, who it had come into contact with, and what exactly was its history. So this is the 8 pages. I became determined to retrace the steps of the manuscript and on a pilgrimage, if you will. So I started in the Republic of Armenia, where the rest of the manuscript, so the 8 pages at the Getty were removed from the manuscript, but the rest of the manuscript miraculously has survived and is located today in the Madenataran in the Republic of Armenia. So I first visited the mother manuscript, and then I visited the place in where it had been created, the castle of Hromgla on the Euphrates, which was, at the time of the creation of the manuscript, the personal fiefdom of the Catholicos of the Armenian Church, Catholicos Constantine I. In the middle of the 13th century, Constantine I had, who was a patron of the arts, had assembled an exceptional team of artists and craftsmen at the castle, and they together created a great number of books, most of them religious books, most of them beautifully illuminated, and a fraction of these works have come down to our day, and the Zeytun Gospels was one of them. As you can see, the castle at Hromgla, known as Rumkale today, not far from Urfa, is a beautiful site today, and it features some remains, some ruins of Armenian cultural heritage. And you see that the tower you're seeing on the screen is probably dated from the 12th century, and it features these khachkars, these cross stones, these carved stelae on its facade. And when you look closely, you see that the carved stone, the khachkar, has been mutilated. So it features a beautifully ornamented frame. It has an eagle with its arms outstretched, possibly the sigil of the patron of this building. But you see the remains of Armenian letters on either side of the stela. They spell Jesus Christos, or they did at one time before they were partially mutilated. And here in this blank space, there was once an Armenian cross. So it was very important for me to visit this site and to realize that in this place where Toros Roslin had once worked and created, and where so many fathers of the Armenian Church, including Saint Nerses Shnorhali, had composed his music and their commentaries and their theological treatises, it was as if no Armenian had ever been here. There was no sign there was no statue of Toros Roslin. There was no sign that Armenians had ever seen here. So in this sense, my experience was very similar to the one that Ani described to us, and I'm sure to the experience that many of you have had when visiting these spaces. There is no acknowledgement that Armenians had ever lived here. There is no acknowledgement that Armenians ever created art here. So it was very clear to me that in most lawsuits or arguments for reparations or restitution, when it comes to works of art, the argument is that the work of art should be returned to its place of origin, to its community of origin. And of course, due to the circumstances of the Armenian genocide and its aftermath, it was very clear that the Zeytun Gospels was not going to come back to this particular castle where the presence of Armenians Armenians was not even acknowledged. So my journey to retrace the steps of the manuscript over its 700 years of existence continued as I made my way to Zeytun in the Taurus Mountains, where the manuscript was taken at some point, probably in the late 16th and 17th centuries. In Zeytun, the manuscript functioned as a liturgical object, and it was the last place where it functioned as a religious book. It was kept in, these are photos of old Zeytun, and what you're seeing on the screen is Zeytun Citadel. And in the middle of Zeytun Citadel was the Church of the Holy Mother of God, and the Zeytun Gospels was kept in that church in a special relic box in a niche carved in the north wall of the church. And it is after Zeytun that the manuscript is known as the Zeytun Gospels. The book was taken out on very rare occasions. Very few people would have the right to look at it, so the beautiful illuminations by Toros Roslin was not seen by everyone. The book would have been taken out on special occasions in the liturgical calendar for feast days in the Armenian Church. It would have been held up over the congregation, so the people of Zeytun would have seen the book, would have experienced it as this powerful object that could accomplish things in the world, and that they saw as a closed book with a dazzling binding. So a very different experience of a book than we have today. And like Ani, I explored Zeytun and tried to find traces of old Zeytun, of Armenian Zeytun. And as many of you who have been to Zeytun, of course, you visited the fountain, the famous fountain of Zeytun, whose cold waters have curative powers. Pay attention to the central arch of this fountain, which was constructed in the 19th century. And you can see that we're seeing the same process of very selective mutilation here. There are these carvings, ornamental carvings above the faucet, and there was once here in this rectangle several lines of an Armenian inscription, and which has been very carefully and very selectively scraped out. And in this case, thanks to the collection of eyewitness statements by survivors, we know exactly when the mutilation of the Fountain of Zeytun took place. It took place in the early weeks of April 1915, when Zeytun had been targeted for the Armenians of Zeytun were herded into exile by the Ottoman government. Zeytun was one of the first locations where the process of deportation that was part of the Armenian genocide began. And the survivors even recalled the name of the Ottoman officer who ordered these inscriptions to be erased. So the destruction of the culture, the destruction of those signs that indexed Christianity or Armenians were part and parcel of the Armenian genocide. They were not collateral damage. The destruction of culture was not a byproduct of it, but rather it was front and center. We visited some of the remnants of old Zeytun, including what was once an old bath, which is now being used as the home of this very nice donkey. So there are some remains of old Zeytun, just hidden in plain sight. They are there, but they are not acknowledged as being part of Armenian culture. When the genocide began and the Zeytunsis were ordered out of their homes as part of the Armenian genocide, an individual who was a notable, an Ishkhan in Zeytun parlance, who had a special relationship with the Zeytun Gospels, made the decision to take the Gospels out of its special box and to take it with him on the road to exile. And it was due to his decision to do that, to take the Gospels with him into exile as in order to protect himself and his family. It is thanks to that decision that this object has survived. And when I was in Zaytun and standing on the ruins of Zaytun Citadel, which housed the Zaytun Gospels for a few hundred years, it dawned on me that of the rich cultural heritage, the rich religious heritage of the Armenians of Zaytun and the surrounding areas, of the monasteries that were in these mountains that had the reputation of having built by apostles. They were Arakelyan, built by apostles. It occurred to me that the Zaytun Gospels was the only object of these of the rich cultural heritage, the centuries of Armenian religious heritage that had survived and come down to our day, and that made it even more special, and it made it a survivor. And as I traced the further steps of the manuscript, and I'm just going to scroll down these images because I need to conclude. I encountered more people who had come into contact with the Gospels over the trajectory that it took, the trajectory that it was launched into after it was removed from the Gospels. And one group of people that came into contact with was the Atamian family of Marash, and especially this young man, Hagop Atamian, who, when he was 13 years old in 1920, shortly after the Battle of Marash, a terrible episode of intercommunal violence, and that included a number of atrocities committed by Turkish neighbors against their Armenian neighbors. Young Hagop was the person, as he recounted later, who came into contact with the manuscript that had miraculously survived that battle. And as his father and the elders of Marash decided to entrust the manuscript to a trusted person rather than take it on the road with them where they were in danger of being robbed, young Hagop, 13 years old at the time, made the fateful, momentous, maybe impulsive decision to remove some pages from it and to keep it with him. And so that's how come the pages came to be separated. So the family immigrated to the United States in 1923. This is their Ellis Island entrance record. And here is the family. And as a final insult, the immigration officer registered their race or nationality as Turkish. But they became Americans, and this is a photo of the family shortly after their immigration. So these were the chains of events and the various individuals involved that resulted in the fact that this rare survival of some of the highest points of Armenian art in the Middle Ages now exists in two parts. One part is in the Republic of Armenia at the Madinataran, and 8 pages are in Los Angeles at the Getty Museum. So I'm so pleased that all of you are here today and that you have made you are activists for human rights, you are politically minded, and I am so glad that you have made the struggle for cultural rights part of your agenda. All of us are interested in genocide. We're interested in the intentional destruction of culture and how it relates to, and how it is central to intercommunal violence, to civil war, to genocide. And very poignantly, in the last few days, we have heard reports that as part of the incursion of Turkish forces and their allies into northern Syria, ancient archaeological sites in that part of Syria have also been targeted. So the destruction of culture, the intentional destruction of culture, is never incidental to genocide. Rather, it is part of it. And awareness of as Armenians, we have to be aware and take stock of the almost complete destruction of our glorious tradition of art making since the Middle Ages. But we should also take heart in recognizing the amount of art that has survived, that has managed to evade genocide, even if disfigured, even if bearing bullet holes or separated from the mother manuscript, sundered into two, and yet our art survives and endures. And I would urge us to take a greater role in, especially in the case of artifacts that are today located in Western museums, such as the Getty, and there are many other museums in the United States where survivor objects of the Armenian genocide and works of Armenian art have found a new home. And I would encourage us to visit them and let the museums know that you care about this object, as you consider this object part of your religious heritage, your cultural heritage, and engage the museums in a positive way to have more programming or acknowledged relationship of the medieval objects in their care with the living community that is here in California, with the living faith community and the greater cultural community of Armenians. So please make cultural rights part of your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya and Herna. We want to present to you all picture frames from the conference. So if you guys can come up, take a picture of you all receiving these.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You're good, Herna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so due to some scheduling, we're going to now change those things up a little bit. We're going to introduce our civic engagement panel. So I'm going to introduce Ike Dikijian.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome, activists. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We are very lucky to have this special panel addressing an extremely important aspect of our community, civic engagement. As you all know, 2020 is going to be a huge year with state, local, and federal elections, as well as the 2020 census. As ANCA supporters, you all know how important advocates and representation are for our community here in the United States and for the prosperity of Armenia and Artsakh. Our involvement in government at all levels is critical to not only an informed and engaged community, but it is undoubtedly the best way to ensure that our goals and objectives are addressed. This panel is going to explore the avenues by which you can all get involved in the political system on a state, local, and federal level, from boards and commissions, voter education and participation, state, city, and national offices, and the importance and significance of the 2020 census for the Armenian community. As you can see, we have some very high-profile panelists here with us today. The Honorable Alex Padilla, the Secretary of State of the State of California, the Honorable Dean Logan, Los Angeles County Clerk and Registrar Recorder for the County of LA, and the Appointment Secretary for the California Governor, Gavin Newsom, Catherine Rivera Hernandez. They will be formally introduced by our community's gem, ANCA National Executive Director, Adam Hamparian, who we all know and love. Adam serves as our organization's national point person with the administration, Congress, the media, and the Washington, D.C. foreign policy community. Adam literally does not sleep. He works with our 50 local chapters, dozens of coalition partners, hundreds of community affiliates, and thousands of grassroots activists such as yourselves. His work covers a broad range of legislative, policy, research, political, campaign, media, coalition, and community-related concerns. He has testified before Congress, lectured at the National Defense University, the Foreign Service Institute, and USAID. He's been quoted in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, AP, and Reuters, and has appeared on CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and various other media outlets. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome our moderator for this panel, Aram Hamparian.